Lord of the Flies. Chapter 2. Fire on the Mountain. By the time Ralph finished blowing the conch, the platform was crowded. Ralph sat on a fallen trunk, his left side to the sun. On his right were most of the choir, on his left the larger boys who had not known each other before the evacuation, before him small children squatted in the grass. Ralph cleared his throat. "Well, then." He passed a hand through his fair hair and spoke. "We're on an island. We've been on the mountain top and seen water all round. We saw no houses, no smoke, no footprints, no boats, no people. We're on an uninhabited island with no other people on it." Jack broke in. "All the same, you need an army, for hunting. Hunting pigs, yes. There are pigs on the island." All three of them tried to convey the sense of the pink, live thing struggling in the creepers. "It broke away before I could kill it, but next time—" Jack slammed his knife into a trunk. "So you see," said Ralph, "we need hunters to get us meat. And another thing. There aren't any grown-ups. We shall have to look after ourselves. And another thing. We can't have everybody talking at once. I'll give the conch to the next person to speak. He can hold it when he's speaking, and he won't be interrupted, except by me." Jack was on his feet. "We'll have rules," he cried excitedly. "Lots of rules. Then when anyone breaks 'em—" "Whee! Oh! Whacko! Bong! Doink!" Ralph felt the conch lifted from his lap. Then Piggy was standing cradling the great cream shell, and the shouting died down. Jack, left on his feet, looked uncertainly at Ralph, who smiled and patted the log. Jack sat down. "You're hindering Ralph. You're not letting him get to the most important thing." He paused effectively. "Nobody knows where we are," said Piggy. "Perhaps they knew where we was going to, and perhaps not. But they don't know where we are, 'cause we never got there." Ralph took the conch from his hands. "So we may be here a long time." Nobody said anything. He grinned suddenly. "But this is a good island. Jack, Simon, and me, we climbed the mountain. It's wizard. There's food and drink, and rocks, blue flowers. While we're waiting, we can have a good time on this island." He gesticulated wildly. "It's like in a book." At once there was a clamor. "Treasure Island! Swallows and Amazons! Coral Island!" Ralph waved the conch. "This is our island. It's a good island. Until the grown-ups come to fetch us, we'll have fun." The older boys first noticed the child when he resisted. He was a shrimp of a boy, about 6 years old, and one side of his face was blotted out by a mulberry-colored birthmark. He was muttering and about to cry. The other little boys, whispering but serious, pushed him toward Ralph. "All right," said Ralph. "Come on, then." The small boy looked round in panic. "Speak up." "Let him have the conch," shouted Piggy. "Let him have it." At last Ralph induced him to hold the shell, but by then the blow of laughter had taken away the child's voice. Piggy knelt by him, listening and interpreting to the assembly. "He wants to know what you're going to do about the snake thing." Ralph laughed, and the other boys laughed with him. "Tell us about the snake thing." "Now he says it was a beastie." "Beastie? A snake thing, ever so big. He saw it." Either the wandering breezes or perhaps the decline of the sun allowed a little coolness to lie under the trees. The boys felt it and stirred restlessly. "You couldn't have a beastie, a snake thing, on an island this size," Ralph explained kindly. "You only get them in big countries, like Africa or India." "He says the beastie came in the dark." "Then he couldn't see it." Laughter and cheers. "Did you hear that? Says he saw the thing in the dark. He still says he saw the beastie. It came and went away again and came back and wanted to eat him. He was dreaming. He must have had a nightmare, stumbling about among all those creepers. He says he saw the beastie, the snake thing, and will it come back tonight. But there isn't a beastie. He says in the morning it turned into them things like ropes in the trees and hung in the branches. He says, will it come back tonight? But there isn't a beastie." Jack seized the conch. "Ralph's right, of course. There isn't a snake thing. But if there was a snake, we'd hunt it and kill it. We're going to hunt pigs to get meat for everybody. And we'll look for the snake, too. But there isn't a snake. We'll make sure when we go hunting." Ralph was annoyed and, for the moment, defeated. "But there isn't a beast." Something he had not known was there rose in him and compelled him to make the point, loudly and again. "But I tell you, there isn't a beast." The assembly was silent. Ralph lifted the conch again, and his good humor came back as he thought of what he had to say next. "I've been thinking. We want to have fun, and we want to be rescued. We want to be rescued, and of course we shall be rescued." The simple statement, unbacked by any proof but the weight of Ralph's new authority, brought light and happiness. "And sooner or later a ship will put in here. It might even be Daddy's ship. So you see, sooner or later we shall be rescued." The assembly was lifted toward safety by his words. They liked and now respected him. Spontaneously they began to clap, and presently the platform was loud with applause. Ralph flushed, looking sideways at Piggy's open admiration, and then the other way at Jack, who was smirking and showing that he too knew how to clap. Ralph waved the conch. "Shut up! Wait! Listen! There's another thing. We can help them to find this. If a ship comes near the island, they may not notice us, so we must make smoke on top of the mountain. We must make a fire." "A fire! Make a fire!" At once half the boys were on their feet. Jack clamoured among them, the conch forgotten. "Come on, follow me!" The space under the palm trees was full of noise and movement. Ralph was on his feet too, shouting for quiet, but no one heard him. All at once the crowd swayed toward the island and was gone, following Jack. Ralph was left, holding the conch, with no one but Piggy. "Like kids," he said scornfully. "Acting like a crowd of kids." Ralph looked at him doubtfully and laid the conch on the tree trunk. "I bet it's gone tea time," said Piggy. "What do they think they're going to do on that mountain?" He caressed the shell respectfully, then stopped and looked up. "Ralph, hey, where are you going?" Ralph was already clambering over the first smashed swaths of the scar. A long way ahead of him was crashing and laughter. Piggy watched him in disgust. "Like a crowd of kids." At the return, Ralph found himself alone on a limb with Jack, and they grinned at each other, sharing this burden. "Almost too heavy," Jack grinned back. "Not for the two of us." Together, joined in an effort by the burden, they staggered up the last steep of the mountain. Breath came evenly by now, and sweat dried. Ralph and Jack looked at each other while society paused about them. The shameful knowledge grew in them, and they did not know how to begin confession. Ralph spoke first, crimson in the face. "Will you—" He cleared his throat and went on. "Will you light the fire?" Now the absurd situation was open. Jack blushed too. He began to mutter vaguely. "You rub 2 sticks. You rub—" He glanced at Ralph, who blurted out the last confession of incompetence. "Has anyone got any matches?" Piggy came in shorts and shirt, with the evening sunlight gleaming from his glasses. He held the conch under his arm. Ralph shouted at him. "Piggy, have you got any matches?" Piggy shook his head and came to the pile. "My, you've made a big heap, haven't you?" Jack pointed suddenly. "His specs! Use them as burning glasses!" Piggy was surrounded before he could back away. His voice rose to a shriek of terror. "Mind out! Give 'em back! I can hardly see! You'll break the conch!" Ralph moved the lenses back and forth, this way and that. Almost at once a thin trickle of smoke rose up and made him cough. The flame, nearly invisible at first in that bright sunlight, enveloped a small twig, grew. The flame flapped higher, and the boys broke into a cheer. The beard of flame diminished quickly, then the pile fell inwards with a soft, cindery sound. Ralph raised his head off his forearms. "That was no good." There wasn't any smoke, only flame. Piggy had settled himself in a space between 2 rocks and sat with the conch on his knees. "We couldn't keep a fire like that going, not if we tried." "A fat lot you tried," said Jack contemptuously. "You just sat." "We used his specs," said Simon, smearing a black cheek. "He helped that way." "I got the conch," said Piggy indignantly. "You let me speak." "The conch doesn't count on top of the mountain," said Jack, "so you shut up." "I got the conch in my hand." "Put on green branches," said Maurice. "That's the best way to make smoke." "I got the conch." Jack turned fiercely. "You shut up." Piggy wilted. Ralph took the conch from him. "We've got to have special people for looking after the fire. Any day there may be a ship out there, and if we have a signal going, they'll come and take us off. And another thing, we ought to have more rules. Where the conch is, that's a meeting, the same up here as down there." Jack held out his hands for the conch and stood up, holding the delicate thing carefully in his sooty hands. "I agree with Ralph. We've got to have rules and obey them. After all, we're not savages. We're English, and the English are best at everything, so we've got to do the right things. Ralph, I'll split up the choir, my hunters that is, into groups, and we'll be responsible for keeping the fire going. We'll let the fire burn out now. Who would see smoke at night time anyway? And we can start the fire again whenever we like. And we'll be responsible for keeping a lookout too. If we see a ship out there, we'll put green branches on. Then there will be more smoke." Roger took the conch and looked round at them gloomily. "I've been watching the sea. There hasn't been the trace of a ship. Perhaps we'll never be rescued." "I said before, we'll be rescued sometime. We've just got to wait, that's all." Daring, indignant, Piggy took the conch. "That's what I said. I said about our meetings and things, and then you said shut up. You said you wanted a small fire, and you built a pile like a hayrick. If I say anything," cried Piggy with bitter realism, "you say shut up. But if Jack or Maurice or Simon—" He paused in the tumult, standing, looking beyond them and down the unfriendly side of the mountain to the great patch where they had found dead wood. Then he laughed so strangely that they were hushed, looking at the flash of his spectacles in astonishment. They followed his gaze to find the sour joke. "You got your small fire, all right." Smoke was rising here and there among the creepers that festooned the dead or dying trees. Acres of black and yellow smoke rolled steadily toward the sea. Beneath the capering boys, 1/4 of a mile square of forest was savage with smoke and flame. "You got your small fire, all right." Startled, Ralph realized that the boys were falling still and silent. The knowledge and the awe made him savage. "Oh, shut up!" "I got the conch," said Piggy in a hurt voice. "I got a right to speak." Piggy glanced nervously into hell and cradled the conch. "We got to let that burn out now. And that was our firewood. There ain't nothing we can do. We ought to be more careful. I'm scared." Jack dragged his eyes away from the fire. "You're always scared. Bleh, fatty." Piggy lost his temper. "I got the conch. Just you listen. The first thing we ought to have made was shelters down there by the beach. It wasn't half cold down there in the night, but the first time Ralph says fire, you goes howling and screaming up this here mountain. Like a pack of kids. How can you expect to be rescued if you don't put first things first and act proper? Then when you get here, you build a bonfire that isn't no use. Now you've been and set the whole island on fire. And that's nothing to laugh at. You said Ralph was chief and you don't give him time to think. Then when he says something, you rush off like... He paused for breath, and the fire growled at them. And that's not all. Them kids, the little uns. Who took any notice of 'em? Who knows how many we got?" Ralph took a sudden step forward. "I told you to. I told you to get a list of names." "How could I?" cried Piggy indignantly. "All by myself. They waited for 2 minutes, then they fell in the sea. They went into the forest. They just scattered everywhere. How was I to know which was which?" "Then you don't know how many of us there ought to be?" "How could I, with them little uns running round like insects? Then when you three came back, as soon as you said make a fire, they all ran away, and I never had a chance." "That's enough," said Ralph sharply, and snatched back the conch. "If you didn't, you didn't. Then you come up here and pinch my specs." Jack turned on him. "You shut up. And them little uns was wandering about down there where the fire is. How do you know they aren't still there?" Piggy stood up and pointed to the smoke and flames. A murmur rose among the boys and died away. "That little un," gasped Piggy. "Him with the mark on his face. I don't see him. Where is he now?" The crowd was as silent as death. "Him that talked about the snakes. He was down there. That little un had a mark on his face. Where is he now? I tell you, I don't see him." The boys looked at each other fearfully, unbelieving. "Where is he now?" Ralph muttered the reply as if in shame. "Perhaps he went back to the... Beneath them, on the unfriendly side of the mountain, the drum roll continued.